sino de los seres que moran en esa naturaleza, porque aquí se acostumbraba a enseñar una geografía fría, como si el planeta Tierra estuviese deshabitado.
We have unemployment as almost a permanent disease of our economy since 1925.
I'm convinced that the best hope for the future for Cuba lies in our regaining our full democratic status.
WTVJ News presents FYI, for your information. Another in a series of special reports. Tonight's program, Cuba, Neighbor on a Tightrope. Brought to you by Chase Federal Savings and Loan Association, who invite you to save where thousands save, and say as thousands say. For my money, it's 4% at Chase Federal Savings. Now, your host, Ralph Rennick.
You can't turn on your TV set or radio these days or pick up a newspaper and not hear or see something about Cuba. The story of Cuba is fascinating in that a resurgence of new hope has spread through the island, a hope based on the promises of Fidel Castro. But insidiously lurking in the background of that new hope is the cancerous menace of communism. And communism, while it provides a degree of material progress, destroys freedom. WTVJ News through the years has covered the revolutions of Cuba from the Batista coup in 1952 to the dramatic rise to power of Castro last year. In recent days, I returned to Cuba along with WTVJ newsmen Al Dempsey and Jack Bortley. This program tonight is a report on what we found. We hope it might perhaps give you an additional insight into Cuba, our neighbor on a tightrope. I am holding a package of what appears to be finely ground coffee. It isn't. It is Cuban soil, a symbol of a resurgence of patriotism. Printed on the plastic bag is a Cuban flag and the words, "This is your land, Cubano, defend it." You must remember that Cuba for years has existed under a decayed, corrupt system of government by payola. Past presidents of Cuba and their cohorts tried to keep one hand on the Constitution and the other in the national treasury. Castro has finished all this. Honesty has taken over. Corruption has fled. There has been a rebirth of nationalism. At lunch counters, on automobile windshields, in newspapers and magazines, pictures of Castro, the Cuban savior, are prominently displayed. The lower classes have adulation for Castro. The middle and upper classes may publicly profess praise just to prevent any acts of economic or personal retribution. Buy Cuban products is the big campaign to keep Cuban pesos in Cuba. People are discouraged from buying foreign-made goods, especially luxuries. Import taxes have been hiked. A man with a Cadillac limousine told me he pays $5,000 a year tax just to keep his car, and the license tag alone costs $186 a year. And so the move today is to utilize this fervor of nationalism to reach a new day for Cuba, to raise the level of the lower class and to bring down the level of the upper class, to redistribute the wealth. Many Cubans are prepared for a long siege of austerity to bring this about. One cab driver who is doing little business these days expressed it this way. He said, "I am prepared to eat cable." In other words, he is willing to swallow the unappetizing steel cable with no nutrient value in order to support Castro's system. I thought of what Khrushchev had told me in Moscow last May when he replied to my question concerning Russia's attitude toward the foreign ministers' meeting. Khrushchev said, "We are prepared to eat a ton of salt." What about this man Castro? One evening we went to the Academy of Science where the Prime Minister was scheduled to make a speech. With Castro was Nunez Jimenez, the director of INRA, that's the National Institute of Agrarian Reform. This was a meeting of about 400 members of a mineralogical society, mostly women. Castro took his place at the head table along with Jimenez. It was obvious Castro had the audience in the palm of his hand. The meeting started about 9 o'clock, wound up at 2:30 a.m. Jimenez made a 3-hour speech. Castro sat and listened, and then Castro gave a lengthy talk. It seemed like a needless waste of time and energy for the Cuban leader. There must have been more important ways to occupy Castro's time. His speech was eloquent. There's no debating the fact he is a great orator.
Si en el planeta Tierra y en los picos y en los valles no morasen seres humanos, una geografía que por algún interés egoísta, por alguna causa social poderosa, estaba divorciado de otro elemento.
As you can see, Castro is an interesting study. As he sat listening to Jimenez speak, he would stroke his beard, and one time he even put the tip of his beard in his mouth and chewed on it. Other times he cast his eyes toward the ceiling. He obviously knows his place in the history books of the world is assured. He now seems to be making the most of his role as supreme commander over everything in Cuba. He is the law. There is no constitution. Castro has a vice-like grip on his country. Another word for it, absolute dictatorship. Castro says this one-man rule is needed at the moment as an expediency in order to do in a hurry the many reforms he wants to carry out. The main base of reform is in agriculture. Newsmen Dempsey and Bortley went into the Cuban countryside for a first-hand look, and this is their report. INRA, National Institute for Agrarian Reform, symbol of deep-seated changes taking place throughout Cuba. INRA controls and administers all of the agricultural land and supervises the fishing. INRA also has control over industry. Sometimes called a state within a state, INRA is the largest and most powerful of the new institutions which have sprung up in the wake of revolution. INRA runs co-op farms. INRA operates food stores and fixes prices. Under the land reform, a small farmer like David Lopez seen here has been promised he may retain or is given 66 acres of land. He is told he eventually may buy up to a total of 100 acres. To prevent speculation or large accumulation, he is told he can later sell only with the okay of INRA. During the time of our stay in Cuba, the sugarcane harvest was in full swing. For the foreseeable future, the sugar crop will continue to be the principal source of income to the economy. Expropriation of the large estates, $300 million worth belonging to American investors, is a continuing cause of friction between our two governments. Expropriated owners have no confidence in the 20-year bonds they are supposed to get as chief compensation for their lands. A common sight throughout the countryside of Cuba are farmer soldiers like this one guarding the cane fields against possible sabotage. Newsman Bortley is on the scene. When Castro was fighting Batista, burning the cane fields was a favorite tactic of the revolutionaries to undermine the country's economy. However, this fellow doesn't look too worried. When INRA moved in to initiate the land reform and expropriated the large sugar estates, many critics protested that breaking the large farms up into many small ones held by individual owners would drastically reduce the efficiency of the sugarcane operation. The Castro government's reply to this was to turn the farms into cooperatives under the supervision of INRA administrators and army commandants. Some critics previously loyal to Castro have charged the sugar co-ops will end up as state farms. Those in favor of the INRA co-ops point to the fine new homes like these that are being put up in small centralized villages with a school close by for children. The INRA administrator explained to newsman Dempsey that the workers will all share in the profits when the crop is sold. He spoke with pride also of the crop diversification, like this new field of potatoes, which it is hoped will give year-round work. OP, Public Works. To combat unemployment, the new government has undertaken an enormous construction program, building roads, low-cost housing, thousands of new schools, hospitals, and public buildings, state parks and beaches.